What if I told you that success is not created in a single day? Not by talent, not by luck, not by motivation alone, but by something so small that most people ignore it completely. A tiny improvement, just 1% better than yesterday. It sounds insignificant, almost too small to matter. Yet history is filled with people whose lives transformed not because they made one giant change, but because they made hundreds of tiny ones. Tonight's story is about a young man who dreamed of a better life, but constantly felt stuck. He wanted success. He wanted confidence. He wanted happiness. But, like many people, he kept waiting for a perfect moment that never came. Until one evening, he met an old gardener who shared a simple secret. Improve by just 1% each day, and your future self will thank you. At first, the advice seemed too simple, but what happened next changed his life forever. So take a deep breath, relax, and let tonight's story begin. Long ago, in a quiet village surrounded by rolling hills and green fields, there lived a young man named Ethan. Ethan had big dreams. He wanted to become successful. He wanted financial freedom. He wanted confidence. He wanted a meaningful life. Every night before sleep, he imagined a brighter future. But every morning, he woke up to the same reality. Nothing changed. Weeks became months. Months became years. His dreams remained dreams. Ethan spent a great deal of time planning. He bought notebooks. He watched motivational speeches. He read articles about success. He made long lists of goals. But there was one problem. He rarely took action. Whenever he tried to change his life, he aimed too high. One day, he decided he would wake up at 5 a.m., exercise for an hour, read 50 pages, learn a new skill, work twice as hard, meditate, journal, and completely transform his life overnight. The plan lasted 3 days. Then he quit. A month later, he tried again and failed again. The cycle repeated itself for years. One autumn afternoon, frustrated and exhausted, Ethan left the village and wandered into the countryside. Eventually, he arrived at a beautiful garden. Flowers of every color filled the landscape. Fruit trees stretched toward the sky. Butterflies danced through the air. Everything seemed healthy and alive. At the center of the garden sat an elderly gardener. His hands were weathered. His clothes were simple. Yet his eyes carried a quiet wisdom. Ethan approached him. "Your garden is incredible." The old gardener smiled. "Thank you. How long did it take?" The gardener chuckled. "A lifetime." Ethan looked around. "I wish success worked that way." The old man raised an eyebrow. "What way?" "Slowly." The gardener laughed. "Success always works slowly." Ethan shook his head. "It doesn't feel that way. Everyone else seems to be moving ahead. People become successful overnight." The old man smiled again. "No, they become visible overnight. That's different." The gardener picked up an acorn from the ground. "Do you know what this is?" "A seed," Ethan replied. The gardener nodded. "And what does it become?" "An oak tree." The old man held the tiny acorn in his hand. This tree begins here. Not with branches, not with leaves, not with shade. Just this. The gardener paused. Most people want the tree, but they ignore the seed. The words lingered in Ethan's mind. The gardener continued, "Tell me, if I planted this acorn today, would it become a giant oak tomorrow?" "Of course not." "What about next week?" "No." "Next month?" "No." The gardener smiled. Yet every day something would be happening beneath the surface. The roots would be growing, even when nobody could see them. Ethan sat quietly. The old man leaned forward. The greatest mistake people make is underestimating small improvements. They believe tiny actions don't matter, so they never begin. The gardener pointed toward a stone pathway. "Do you see that path?" Ethan nodded. It wasn't created in one day. Thousands of footsteps made it. One step seems insignificant, but thousands of steps create a road. Something about the gardener's words felt different. Unlike the motivational speeches Ethan had heard before, these ideas felt real, practical, proven. The old man stood up and handed Ethan a small notebook. "Starting tomorrow, improve one thing by 1%. Ethan frowned. "Only 1%? The gardener nodded. "That's enough." The next morning, Ethan began. Instead of reading 50 pages, he read 1 page. Instead of exercising for an hour, he walked for 10 minutes. Instead of trying to change everything, he changed one tiny thing. It felt almost ridiculous. Surely success required more than this. But he continued anyway. 1 week passed. Nothing dramatic happened. 1 month passed. Still no miracle. Yet something subtle was changing. His habits were becoming easier. His confidence was growing. His excuses were shrinking. 3 months later, Ethan noticed he was waking up earlier without effort. He was reading regularly. He was exercising consistently. For the first time in years, he was actually keeping promises to himself. And something remarkable happened. The small habits began creating bigger opportunities. The books he read gave him new ideas. The skills he practiced became valuable. The confidence he developed opened doors. The discipline he built strengthened every area of his life. One evening, Ethan returned to the garden. The old gardener was watering flowers. "I understand now," Ethan said. The old man smiled. "Tell me." Ethan looked around. The changes were invisible at first, but they were happening. Like roots growing beneath the soil. The gardener nodded. Exactly. Years passed. Ethan eventually built a successful business. He became respected in his community. People often asked him for advice. They expected some great secret, some magical shortcut, some hidden formula. Instead, Ethan always shared the same lesson. The life you want is built one day at a time. Many people laughed when they heard it. It sounded too simple, too ordinary, too small. But Ethan knew something they didn't. Great success rarely arrives through dramatic moments. It arrives through repeated small actions. A single workout changes very little. Hundreds transform a body. A single page teaches little. Hundreds create wisdom. A single kind act seems small. Hundreds build strong relationships. Every meaningful achievement begins as something almost invisible. A tiny choice, a small habit, a single step, repeated consistently. One evening, many years later, Ethan walked through the same garden where his journey began. The gardener had grown old, very old, yet his eyes still sparkled with wisdom. They sat together beneath a giant oak tree, the same tree that had once been an acorn. The gardener pointed upward. "Do you remember our first conversation?" Ethan smiled. "I do." The gardener nodded toward the tree. "This is what 1% looks like." Ethan stared at the enormous branches stretching across the sky, and suddenly, he realized the lesson had never been about success. It had been about patience, trust, consistency, faith in small beginnings. The oak tree had never worried about becoming a tree. It simply focused on growing each day, little by little, root by root, season by season, until one day it became something extraordinary. And perhaps that is how all meaningful lives are built. Not through perfection, not through motivation, not through giant leaps, but through small, daily improvements that compound over time. Ending message. As you prepare to sleep tonight, remember this: you do not need to transform your entire life tomorrow. You do not need to become perfect. You do not need to take giant steps. You only need to become slightly better than yesterday. One page, one walk, one lesson, one habit, one promise kept. That is enough. Because success is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary days, repeated with purpose. Trust the process. Trust your growth. Trust your small beginnings. And remember, the person who improves by just 1% each day eventually becomes someone they once thought was impossible. Close your eyes. Let go of today's worries. Your future is not created overnight. It is being quietly built, one small step at a time. Good night, and may tomorrow be 1% better than today.